The thing about Dr. Joseph Nicolosi is that he just never quit. It didn't matter what the opposition was. He knew exactly what he had to accomplish in his life, and he literally laid down his life in the fight to help men and women to live the lives that they wanted to live. What greater tribute to a life so well spent is there?
He was so optimistic. He really believed that eventually people would get it, that the society would get it, that the psychological community would get it, because he saw it in his clinic every day that people could change. And I think that when that recognition happens, his resources that he wrote and all of the work that he did will become even more important.
Joe Nicolosi's contribution was so unique for many people's lives, but in my life as well, because his therapy is so profoundly spot on in terms of professional, time-tested therapy that really works. He gave a gift to the world.
The man was a specialist, of course, in the area of male sexuality and homosexuality, but he also had a breadth and depth of knowledge I've never seen before. His training in psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theory is so profound, and his ability to see things that the average clinician couldn't see is just simply amazing.
What would you say was unique about his contribution?
What was unique is that Joseph Nicolosi was not a politician. He was not a modern-day politician. He was a man of facts and arguments.
I think Dr. Nicolosi's contribution is he regrounded psychology into the views that we have the ability to know what is normal, what is healthy sexuality, and we can overcome and help people know why they feel and act the way they do. And we can help them overcome those issues. That's the greatest thing he did.
10% of the population is homosexual. Not true. For 60 years, people have been told it's 10%, it's not. It's 1.5 to 2%. You're born gay, the other myth. There is still no gay gene discovered. They're still looking for it. Once gay, always gay. People can't change. Homosexuality is normal in every way. That's the other myth that's being promoted.
Now the big one that we're attacking is change is not possible. Change is possible. So think about it. The 5 pillars of the gay movement are 5 lies. What does that tell you about its leadership? What does it tell you about the people? What does it tell you about the nature of the movement that is built on 5 lies? They lie. When I started doing this work many years ago, I sat down with Irving Bieber, who was a giant, and his wife, Toby Bieber, and I sat with them, and they said to me, "Joe, they lie." And I said to myself, these poor people, they must be burnt out and tired. How can you say gay people lie? They lie. Because it's founded on a lie. Gay is an inauthentic identity. It's a make-believe identity. It's an identity that is a simple answer for a complicated psychological problem. That's why to be gay is to be anti-intellectual. You cannot inquire. The first thing of reparative therapy is what? We inquire. See, to keep the gay lie alive, you mustn't look at it. You must not look at you must not question it. Oh, I have a gay gene. I'm gay because I'm gay, because I'm gay, because I'm gay. And how dare you ask me? That's the end of the conversation. There is no dialogue. They refuse to engage us, because if they engage us, we're going to get into what is this phenomenon? And it's like an onion that you peel away until there's nothing left but the smell.
Probably the best way to understand Nicolosi is to know something about the organization he helped to found. The NARTH Institute, or the National Association for Research and Therapy for Homosexuality, is now the training arm of the Alliance for Therapeutic Choice and Scientific Integrity. It owes much to its former president, Joseph Nicolosi, who published widely and connected with people all over the globe. His colleague and friend, Benjamin Kaufman, tells the story.
I had heard of Joe in the newspapers in Northern California. There was this guy down in Southern California who was creating problems, and he was being chastised. I was very familiar with the literature of Charles Socarides, who I became very friendly with around this issue, and I went to see him, and he was interested in starting an organization, and I told him there was this guy out there in California that I could get in touch with who's making a lot of trouble. And so I called Joe. He immediately agreed to see me. And then he really, Joe has that personality. He just moves right in. And then he says, I know what to do. And indeed he did. He had already written about it, and he was already well known in professional circles. And I was blind to it. I didn't know anything about it.
So in a nutshell, what would you say his chief contribution to the field?
His courage, his really wanting to make a difference, his conviction, and he had the courage of his convictions. He just had he had those qualities in his personality. He also was a scholar, like Socarides. Socarides was a Greek scholar, fierce. Joe was equally as fierce, and the two of them just tangle, and it was a pleasure to watch. It was like watching giants who say, no, it's going to be my view, or else I won't play with you. But at the same time, the other person saying the same thing, but having these kind of unspoken agreements, we're going to be working together for the rest of our professional lives. And Joe was like that. He just had that dynamism. He continued consistently to contribute and to research and to publish in the face of a lot of adversity, in the face of having to play his role in raising a family, be a great dad. He was a really energetic, busy guy.
Desert Stream Ministry founder and director Andrew Comiskey gives an insightful perspective on how things were in the beginning as Nicolosi rose to controversial prominence.
I think he brought a piercing clarity to the wound at the core of same-sex attraction, and also a humane and reasonable therapeutic approach for persons who wanted to address that wound therapeutically. So I think it's both the insight and the intervention in terms of reasonable psychotherapy. So he was drawing upon the psychodynamic school of understanding the roots of sexual identity disorders, but he brought such a clear way forward for other therapists to realize, I can actually take my training and apply this to effective care for persons with unwanted same-sex attraction seeking help.
It's not necessarily apparent when we've seen so many quite hostile media interviews around the work of Joseph Nicolosi just how committed to and engaged with his clients he really was. He never lost touch with the people he worked with in his clinic. And this was evident when listening to him teach on his clinical practice.
The client is wired to be shame sensitive. When he feels the shame, he actually feels it in his body as a dropping, sinking, collapsing. And we teach the client to identify that. Because if he ignores it, he's going to go to the next step called GZ, gray zone. The gray zone is a mood state. Down, depressed, out of power, lonely, negative, isolated. And that is the psychological state for homosexual enactment. Now, my wife says never speak in absolutes. I can tell you this absolutely works all the time.
Current Alliance President Carolyn Peeler picks up the quality of his relationship with his clients.
He's such an enigma because, he was like this huge personality, brash, that New York Sicilian thing, but he was also just this soft heart. If you ever saw him work, his ability to have empathy and connect with his clients in how they moved him. They never quit moving him. One of the last times he and I had a conversation, he was talking about a session he had with a client in which the client experienced some profound healing, and Joe just came to tears. And this is what he did every day, but he never lost that. So he is the most congruent person I think I've ever met. His, psychological perspective matched his perspective of biology and theology, and he just lived his whole life out of that place.
Carolyn Peeler and Joseph Nicolosi worked on a study looking at the impact of therapy on clients seeking change from unwanted same-sex attractions. In simple terms, it asks, do people change, and is it harmful for them to do so? The study is called Change and Well-Being, Sexual Attraction Fluidity Exploration in Psychotherapy.
The research project started when I was working on something else with Dr. Phil Sutton and a couple of other researchers in a similar project. And Joe approached me and said, hey, I have all of these potential participants at my clinic. Why don't we do something similar? So we received permission almost to the day 4 years ago to launch this study where we were exploring the impact of sexual attraction fluidity exploration and therapy, specifically reparative therapy, on the well-being of the participants and also on their sexual attraction experiences. So we started recruiting participants, we started gathering data, we monitored their well-being almost on a weekly basis and measured their sexual attractions, their feelings, thoughts, desires, identity. And at this point we have over 100 adult male participants, and we have found that their sexual attractions have moved steadily away from same-sex attraction and steadily toward opposite-sex attraction, and their well-being has flourished. And this is all statistically significant.
Can you tell us something about the population sample that's being used here?
These are basically young men who have come to our clinic who are unhappy with their same-sex attraction. And we are helping them diminish their same-sex attraction, and we're helping them increase their opposite-sex attraction. And we're showing that we're getting results. Of course, it's early in the stage of our looking at our data, but already the data is suggesting that their same-sex attraction diminishes. More importantly, their identity diminishes. In other words, they are likely to come in identified as homosexual and less likely to identify as homosexual and more likely to identify as heterosexual as they continue through the therapy. And we're getting very good. And of course, the strongest evidence counters the big argument that we are doing harm, because we're measuring their well-being, and their well-being actually gets better in the course of therapy.
What does your research tell us about harm?
It's quite the opposite of the claim. The opposition is claiming that people are harmed by this kind of therapy. They become more depressed, they become suicidal. Absolutely not. We're showing the opposite results. They're feeling better about themselves because they're fulfilling their goal. They want to get rid of something they find distressing, namely their same-sex attraction. And as they begin to experience that, as they begin to understand where these homosexual feelings come from, and as we address the trauma that was the foundation of these attractions, these people feel better. And it's statistically significant to show that they are increasing in their well-being.
It's important because it very clearly demonstrates in a statistically significant way that not only is this therapy for this population not harmful, it increases well-being, not only in those who find change, but even in those who still identify as gay. It wasn't only clients, but also clinicians who benefited from Nicolosi's professional input. So, for example, David Pickup was an intern at Nicolosi's Thomas Aquinas Clinic in California, and he indicates how Joseph's contribution to his own development as a psychotherapist was really important.
He gave a gift to the world. He gave a gift to me, and what he caused also, because of his great training with my internship with him, was giving me a career that he was more than equipped to handle. His expert leadership in philosophy, theory, practice, encouragement, inspiration, he had it all.
I remember hearing about him for the first time in psychiatric residency and just being astounded and in awe of what one person can do and his courage in living out his understanding of what truth is and trying to fight against a lot of the negative things in society which have just deemed many, many people to a life and existence that they don't have to exist in.
He provided a clear framework for understanding the gaps in a young boy or girl's development that contributes to the sexualizing of unmet emotional needs later on in life.
It's hard to think of anyone seriously working in the area of therapeutic support for unwanted same-sex attraction who didn't know about the work of Joe Nicolosi or hadn't read his books or interacted with his teaching in some way. His work was fundamental to the field, and even if you didn't agree with him, you have to have read Nicolosi to be familiar with the field. The thing was, he had a very clear theory about what his clinical experience was teaching him about the role of homosexuality in a man's life and how to go about helping those who sought his help, those who don't want to live according to that way. And thankfully, he's left many colleagues who continue his work and understand his approach.
Reparative drive is basically the person trying to repair themselves. And like I say, the homosexual is trying to repair what's missing within himself through sexual contact. Okay? But this notion of reparative drive theory or the reparative therapy has a long history. It goes way back into the 1920s, 1930s. The whole history of psychoanalytic study on homosexuality always repeats this theme that the homosexual is trying to recapture his lost masculinity through sexual activity. I started becoming interested in the reparative concept based on Elizabeth Moberly. She wrote a little book, a 53-page book called Homosexuality, a New Christian Ethic. It was a very small book. Elizabeth Moberly said that the homosexual is defensively detached from other men emotionally and is trying to make up for it through sexual contact. Well, she got it from John Bowlby's attachment theory. John Bowlby called it detached defensiveness, and she called it defensive detachment. But see, that took reparative therapy into the whole literature of attachment. And the therapeutic relationship is an attempt to establish that attachment with the male therapist.
I was in a taxi coming home from the airport, having been working on The Voices of the Silence film, and I was stunned to hear that Joseph had died suddenly. As we begin to think about the impact of Nicolosi's work, it's clear that we can be grateful for his leadership and modeling ways to engage with detractors in the media and the professional elites who lead professional mental health organizations who have fallen under the spell of gay activism.
It's an understatement, but I was devastated. I was in total shock and disbelief. I had actually believed that maybe his enemies had assassinated him. When I heard that he had died from physical causes, I was totally shocked. One of the man's outstanding talents was his ability to teach and also to listen. He was an expert instructor. There isn't a day that goes by that when I myself do therapy that I don't think about him or how he would handle a situation. I've completely internalized all that he's taught me. And I think that, he's planted the seeds for truth to be known. He's planted the seeds for healing. And some people say he was a man who was bigger and greater than life, and I'd have to agree.
I can honestly say that I would have died for Dr. Nicolosi. I think his work is so important, and I wish he had been around longer to help us continue more work.
It's still hard for me to believe it. It's such a big hole in the universe, with him being gone. It's just hard. And in the Alliance, it's hard. He's the heart of that organization. He was the energy. He was there from the beginning and maintained his work with the organization. So I can't even imagine what it's going to be like for us to continue without him.
Like everyone else, I was shocked, to say the least. And yet, I knew within hours that I was going to be privileged to be one of the many people who absolutely promote and to develop and carry on his legacy no matter what. The truth can't be repressed, not really, not ultimately, and neither can compassion. And those are my watchwords as we all move forward and carry on the name of Joseph Nicolosi and his work. We will persevere. And I knew that I would be coming to his memorial. I knew things would be happening because I've experienced deaths in my own family, so I know what happens in these situations. So when you get through the shock and when time tells, then after all is said and done, his work moves on, and he's left us a great, great legacy.
He was so vital. He was a vital 70-year-old. He was a 70-year-old going on 55. And so his exuberance, his joy about continuing to go up the middle of this cultural down drag in regards to misunderstanding and misinterpreting homosexuality never ceased to enthuse him. He was ever exuberant when it came to making known what the real issues are and the real help that is available for persons with SSA. So to hear that he had passed was unthinkable because he showed absolutely no signs of stopping and doing it with such a joie de vivre, such an exuberance. So he will be missed. And in that way, he was truly Californian. He did have a kind of pushing the envelope optimism that we can do this. And I think that was unflagging over the course of his entire life.
Joseph Nicolosi was active on all fronts, engaged with clients, publishing, and also as an advocate for the rights of therapists to offer this work. And really, his attitude to the politicization of sexuality and the normalization of homosexuality is really instructive and important as we consider his importance and legacy to the world.
My hope for the future is that we continue doing this work, that we begin to refine our therapy, we begin to get better results than ever before, and that we document our evidence that people can change, and that the possibility of change becomes once again acknowledged in the culture.
Have you ever felt that you are being silenced?
Yes, I feel like I'm being silenced by the media and by the professional the structure of the mental health profession. I can't get anything published. I can't get any acknowledgement. I'm psychoanalytically oriented. Okay, I cannot get a hearing in the psychoanalytic division of the American Psychological Association. I can get nothing published. I can get no forum, no workshop, nothing. See, their only way of dealing with me is to silence me. See, if they thought that they were right, then let's have a conversation. Let's talk. But they know that talk will lead to the exposure that they are covering a lie. APA, people think that the American Psychological Association is composed of these scientists who sit around and ask scientific questions and come up with scientific answers and then tell the public. No, the American Psychological Association is very much governed by special interest groups, and that dominates the policy making. The policy is not based in science. The policy is based on politics.
Give me specific examples of when you feel you've been silenced.
A very good example of the politicization of this subject is in 2009, the American Psychological Association wanted to release a study, an extensive study on the subject of homosexuality. And we submitted our names, those of us in NARTH, myself, Yarhouse, Stanton Jones, Dean Bird. These are all big names who have done research in this area. We submitted our names. We were all rejected. Instead, the committee of 8, 7 of which were all gay. Not only were they gay, but they were gay activists. So, if it's 1% of the population and they're a scientific organization, you would think that it should be 1% of the task force report. Instead, it was 7 out of 8. That's just one example.
So what does it mean to say you're gay? It means, if you analyze, look at the psychology of the gay identity. To say you're gay, and this is coming from the gay researchers themselves, the coming out of the closet, when you do the psychology of the coming out process, the process is, I discovered I was homosexual. I discovered I had these feelings, but I didn't want them. I tried to pray it away. I tried to hope it away. I tried to deny it. I tried to suppress it. But inevitably, I had to abandon the hope of ever being heterosexual. So the requirement for a gay identity is first abandoning, giving up the hope of ever being heterosexual. Okay? So you're dealing with 6 of 7 people who in their own personal life had to give up the hope of ever being heterosexual. So how could they possibly be open to the possibility that other people can change? It's like a person who is searching for God and does not experience God in his life, is disappointed, becomes an atheist. Now, how valid would he consider a person's religious experience? He would not take it seriously because he can't, if it can't be true for me, it can't be true for anybody else. This is the psychological background of the task force report.
We cannot possibly allow this man's contribution to men's issues to be forgotten, nor neglect to credit his work for his seminal contribution. His perspective in both analytical and psychodynamic aspects of therapy for unwanted homosexuality may be challenged, but for thousands around the world, his voice was the clearest in a very confused world, and for those coming to him, he provided real and lasting answers.
He was drawing upon the psychodynamic school of understanding the roots of sexual identity disorders, but he brought such a clear way forward for other therapists to realize I can actually take my training and apply this to effective care for persons with unwanted same-sex attraction seeking help.
And yet there was opposition to his work. Why would you say that was the case?
The opposition came from the very forces that surrounded Joe Nicolosi in Los Angeles in the time that he was being trained there in the late 70s and started his counseling center in 1980. So UCLA, USC, the clinical schools that of any repute in that area were changing the goalposts for psychotherapy in regards to persons with SSA. Joe was in the middle of it, doing good thinking and writing, and also beginning this substantial practice where many therapists were getting trained. And so right up the middle of all of it was this very important stream of life-giving care for persons like myself who were wanting good care in dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction. So he was a well in the desert, if you will, of Southern California in the area of effective, truthful pastoral care and clinical care for persons with SSA.
Gays have taken that term reparative therapy. Oh, you're trying to repair us. You think we need fixing, like you're trying to repair a car. No, what we're trying to say is that that homosexual behavior is an attempt to repair yourself. You're trying to make the masculine connection. You're trying to make that gendered-based connection that you did not get in your childhood, and that it's not working. That's why you're coming to us, because the effort to repair yourself through homosexual activity is not working. There is still not a credible child developmental model that can explain homosexuality unless you traumatize a child first. If you don't traumatize a child, he will be heterosexual. If you traumatize him in a particular way that has to do with his sense of gender, then you create the homosexual condition. Reparative therapy does only three things. It asks questions, it inquires, what are you doing, what are you looking for, what's motivating you? Number one. Number two, it offers interpretation, and the client doesn't have to accept the interpretation, but the therapist might say something like, you know, last week you said to me that you are repulsed by the female body. I remember 2 sessions before that, you said you slept in the same bed with your mother until you were 14. I wonder if there's a connection. That's called offering an interpretation. That's what we do. So we ask questions, we offer interpretations, and the third thing we do is we educate. We provide accurate scientific information for the client's information.
His resources that he wrote and all of the work that he did will become even more important.
I had a great deal of respect and admiration for him even before I met him. But of course, in meeting him, I came to know the person and not just his work, and had a lot in common, not just because of our professional interests, but because of our Italian heritage and common background in many respects. So we became friends through working together, and I developed that much more of a deeper appreciation when I saw the genuine care and compassion he had towards people, including people on the other side of this case who had a completely different worldview and completely different goals about, preventing people from getting the type of help that Dr. Nicolosi was able to provide. But he, in a compassionate but yet courageous manner, continued to speak the truth about the issues that are very important regarding same-sex attraction, and about how people can and should have the right to determine their own destiny and live their lives in conformity with their deepest, most profound personal and religious values. Throughout that experience, I learned a lot about him and his work, and was able to benefit very greatly from that experience, and would like to see his work continue so that other people can continue to be helped by the work, and I'm happy to speak on behalf of him and what he did for so many people.
His legacy will be several key things. His legacy will be NARTH, absolutely, and the Alliance. His legacy will be the underpinnings of a profound work of truth psychologically that fits beautifully with spirituality, even though it wasn't created to directly reflect that. It does fit true spirituality. And that will be his legacy for people of faith or secular people from all over the world who are having issues with gender and sexuality that don't fit for them, that gets them on track. Now, long story short, his legacy will be creating a way that men and women can look at the issues that are very tough, to say the least, but that can truly transform and change, not just behaviorally, emotionally. I see the effects of his legacy every week in my office because I was trained in with his marvelous training, and I carry on that legacy throughout my office, and I know my colleagues do as well, because we're all trained pretty much the same way. So, and then his legacy for the world is a legacy of the same thing, truth and compassion. Even though many parts of the world, not many, some parts of the world who don't understand this, who don't bother to even find out what this is all about, they may rip him to shreds still, but it doesn't matter because the truth and compassion will ultimately prevail, and that is his legacy in this therapy work.
I think Dr. Nicolosi will be remembered, at least from my standpoint, as a role model of one who is willing to go that far mile for the patients and help them understand that there are people who understand what they're going through and that they can help them overcome unwanted same-sex attraction and be consistent with their values and not have to be pressured into what society is trying to push them down towards, which leads to many medical, psychological problems.
One of his qualities was his wisdom, his ability to see things that, of course, other people don't see, and his intelligence in the field. Again, as I mentioned before, he has a lot of critics, but when the critics are put on the spot and asked to refute his theories, they don't do such a good job.
Seldom has a man been so blatantly misunderstood and unappreciated, but the truth is, he was a true friend, not only particularly of the men who sought his help and advice, but of countless professionals who have read him and applied his principles in their counseling and therapeutic contexts. He taught them compassion and really how to love these men. I don't think there's any doubt that his work will endure and will increasingly count as a major, if not the major, theoretical and practical approach for helping those whose own experience led them to understand that their homosexual feelings were maladjustments and really felt unnatural to their very design and purpose. Joseph Nicolosi, a true friend.